Hello, thanks for taking the time to join this Agile Bytes webinar. My name is Chris Hands. Today I'm going to discuss Agile estimating and planning. Specifically, I want to talk about one particular technique called playing poker. My aim is to give you pointers on how to run playing poker sessions and what benefits of using the method are. In the email that went out earlier in the week, there is a link to a feedback form, so please leave your comments as they will help future sessions. If we could leave questions until the end, I will attempt to answer you via the chat messaging system.
So to begin with, I thought it would be useful to start by discussing why points-based estimating and planning is useful. Well, first of all, it's a very fast way of estimating a whole piece of work. It quickly gets you to a point where you can understand the effort that is going to be required to complete a piece of work. And in turn, it can also be used to forecast and reliably predict the future performance of your team. By knowing how many points a team has managed to complete in a certain amount of time, you can then apply this to your planning and decide what amount of work a team can get through in the future. This can avoid the problems of over or underestimating. Points are also a very good reference point for measuring progress. By looking at how many points a team is reporting as complete, we can work out the speed at which they're working at any given point. In the Agile world, this is called velocity, and it's a theme you'll hear coming up time and time again as we have these types of discussions. By breaking work into components that are individually pointed, we can also compare them relative to each other. This is particularly useful to know when you're prioritising effort and assigning resource to that piece of work. Lastly, and as I hope to demonstrate in this presentation, the approach itself allows teams to engage in the estimation process. Through this involvement, it builds personal investment, which leads to commitment from the team. And as probably we all know, building commitments and gaining the buy-in from the team is core to any successful delivery that we have. I thought it would be useful just to take a few moments just to examine some of the traditional models of estimating and planning. I'm pretty sure everyone will recognise these and have no doubt use them in their daily jobs. So essentially what we tend to do is we take a list of requirements and we break them down into a work breakdown structure, which subsequently becomes a list of tasks to do. And we'll recognise things like, build a piece of technology, test a piece of technology, those kind of tasks. We then estimate these for effort and duration, and the sum total of these, plus some contingency, then goes on to form the plan. I'm sure people have used things like 3-point estimation, where you give the best, the worst, and the most likely outcome for a piece of work. There are, however, some shortcomings in these traditional models, which I was just going to step through. Quite often, individuals can have influence exerted on them when they're giving their estimates. This could be in the form of feeling they have to give a particular number, because they feel they'll be judged unfairly if they don't. Often people can be talked around into changing a figure that they originally gave, because of some external pressure that's put on them. Individuals can also be prone to overestimate due to their ability to do something. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a bias where people believe they're better at things than they actually are, which can lead to overly optimistic estimates. I'll let you decide if I've suffered from the Dunning-Kruger effect in doing this webinar through the feedback form later. Often, traditional models don't always involve all the team. Work is estimated in silos. Developers tend to give their estimates, testers give theirs, business analysts give theirs, and then this siloed approach can lead to gaps in between estimates. These models can then exhibit a behaviour where the estimating planning is seen as very hierarchical and top-down led. Often the team just sees the estimates and plans being created by a few people and is handed down as a fait accompli to them. Often this then leads to feelings of resentment as it's seen as imposition and doesn't really have the buy-in from all the team members. Plans are often built on an ideal time model. There is an assumption that 7.5 hours in a working day and 5 days a week, so that gives you your capacity and you set it accordingly. We all know from personal experience the working day is not like that. We spend time doing other things. We go to the coffee machine, we have one-to-ones with managers, we have different conversations. And so often plans don't take into account that fact. And we're no doubt all familiar with the Gantt plan. Again, these can be problematic. They tend to focus on what's been done rather than what's coming up. They tend to talk in terms of percentage complete, looking backwards, but offer no insight in how fast you did a task or what's going to happen going forward and how quickly you might get through your next set of tasks. And so there's no real indication whether the dates you've applied to the upcoming work are going to be met. Learning from. So, what's the alternative? You won't be surprised, I'm going to say points-based estimation and planning, so let's have a look at that now. So, estimating in points is based on applying a number to a set of user stories or tasks. Writing good user stories, to be honest, is a whole other webinar, so we'll perhaps save that for another day as a separate topic. Quite often, the sequence that you use is something like a Fibonacci scale, which is a series of numbers that increases in size. However, you could just as well use t-shirts, so small, medium, large, extra large, for example, or you could use stones of varying size. So, for example, there's a picture on the right on that slide of a small, medium, and large stone. Or, for argument's sake, you could use animals, so cats. Let's say a domestic cat, a leopard, and a lion. You probably get the picture. So, the focus is on the effort needed to complete a user story. It therefore doesn't matter if the estimators have different skills or competencies. We assess the relative values to each other. So, I'm going to give you a bit of a contrived example here that hopefully talks that through. If we consider the task of washing, say, 2 vehicles and estimating how long it will take to wash a 2-seater sports car and a 30-seater coach, then I've been given that task to myself and my team. My team consists of my dad and my brother-in-law, just for argument's sake. Now, I'm typically very lazy at weekends. I've never washed a car. I tend to leave it to professionals who have those car wash places that you see in town. My dad, on the other hand, washes his car every Saturday. He's done it for the last 25 years. It's pretty routine, so I'd say he's a pretty experienced car washer. My brother-in-law I rank as a keen amateur. He gets the pressure washer out when the number plate can no longer be seen, and he feels he sort of has to do it. So, we all have different experience and options of car washing. Some high experience, some low experience. However, what we can all do is make some comparisons and judgments on the effort required. We can all see the small sports car is smaller, it's easier to walk around and get the sponges on, and it has less panels, and so we can pretty much say it'll be pretty quick to get done. The coach, on the other hand, has a lot of panels, and will need more water, you probably need ladders, and it's going to take much, much longer. Just to throw into the mix, my brother-in-law has a 4-door hatch saloon, so he knows how much effort he has to put into that each week when he does get the pressure washer out, so that sort of gives us something in the middle. So, in doing that, the three of us can quickly agree that the sports car will be the easiest and the coach will be hardest. The 4-door hatch falls somewhere in the middle of the two. So on that basis, we decided that 2 of us should start on the coach and 1 of us should start on the sports car. Then the person on the car could join us washing the coach if they get done quickly on the car, as we suspect they will. So, that was a bit of a silly example, but a lot of it is common sense, but hopefully we can see that we quickly reached a scale for the work. The 3 of us reached consensus, and we both can put some sort of measure on how much effort a sports car and a coach, is going to take to wash. So we can use that information next time when we're planning the next set of vehicle washing, because we'll actually have some figures for doing those 3 sizes of vehicle. I think lastly on these points about point-based planning, story points are a good way to avoid unit confusion. I think it was mentioned on a previous slide that working day is different for everyone, for example. So by using a different sort of scale, we get around this. And lastly, pointing allows us to group items in the higher, into groups, and we can put more emphasis on the higher items accordingly. That way we can focus our attention on what might be more risky and look to de-risk them. Okay, so that all sounds fine in theory, but what about in practice? How do we get points estimated and onto our user stories? So, the technique is called planning poker. It was first defined by a chap called James Greening in 2002, later popularised by Mike Cohn, who owns a company called Mountain Goat. He wrote a book called Agile Estimating and Planning, and trademarked the term for planning poker. So, what do you need to run a session? You need a set of planning poker cards. You need a backlog of user stories identified as candidates for your sprint that's coming up. You need a timer. You need some room and space. I'd suggest you don't do this in the open plan office. You need a place to record the points that you estimate. At KCOM, we seem to use Jira as a piece of software for managing our projects. But let's be clear, this could just as easily be a set of post-it notes on a wall or a whiteboard. We need a facilitator. Now, typically this is the product owner, but it could be the scrum master, it could be a project manager, it could be a PA. Anyone in the team can ultimately play the role. And you need your team willing and wanting to work in this way. So getting them on board is very key. So let's play. The steps are as follows. Each estimator is given a deck of cards, and that card has an estimate written on it. Cards typically based on the Fibonacci scale that I mentioned. So you get a 0, a half, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5, an 8, a 13, 20, 40, and 100. The question mark card is played where people have questions, and there's an infinity card where people feel they can't really give an estimate. The facilitator then reads the user story and discusses it briefly with the team, so they give an overview. Each estimator then selects their card and puts it face down on the table. Cards are then turned all at the same time, so everyone can see what people are estimating. You then discuss the differences. You talk about the outliers, so if there are varying, if a lot of people have gone for something high, a lot of people have gone for something low, you discuss why there are the differences and try and understand them. And ultimately you then re-estimate until you get convergence on the number. If you can't reach agreement quickly, then you place that story back in the backlog and it goes for further grooming until it's at such a point where it can be estimated. So what I'd like to do now is just take you through some examples of some user stories that are played through Planning Poker. So I'm going to use the first example of making a cup of tea. The objective is to make a hot beverage. We want it because it's going to quench our thirst, and there are acceptance criteria on this. The drink must be English breakfast tea, must have skim milk, must at least be 70 degrees, must be served in a china cup, and it's going to have to be brewed for 2 minutes. So, that in mind, my team had to think about that, and they played their first round of cards. And as you can see, we got some varying results, which I'll just talk through now. So, a couple of people played a 2. They thought this task was fairly straightforward. They'd made tea before, and they thought this was pretty similar. There were people that played 5s. They didn't think this task was particularly difficult, but they knew of some issues with different kettles taking longer to boil. They also knew that not all tea bags infuse at the same rate, and they knew that the hardness in the water in the area where their office is also affects the brew. The person who voted question mark wasn't clear whether tea bags were to be used or whether there was an option of loose leaf tea. So they had quite a valid question there about a pretty fundamental part of the process. So the facilitator noted the issue with the water as being a risk. A dependency was duly noted that a kettle from a tier 1 kettle manufacturer needed to be used that ensured it would boil in less than 2 minutes at the right temperature. And it was decided loose leaf tea was out of scope because it was creating an increased overhead in complexity. So that in mind, the team played again. And lo and behold, we all converged on a 3. So ultimately we decided it was somewhere between the 2 and the 5. Okay, so story number 2. You won't be shocked to find this user story is about making a chocolate cupcake to accompany the tea. The client wanted a cupcake-based snack that complements their beverage and keeps them filled up to dinner time. There are acceptance criteria on this, as you'd expect. The cupcake must be made of chocolate. It must contain chocolate chips. The icing has to be buttercream and cover all of the top. And it's got to be in a disposable cupcake holder, the type of paper thing that you see with these things. So, the team played their cards again, and the first hand looked like this. We had someone with a 3. they based that on the fact that the cake they felt was no more difficult to make than a cup of tea. We had some mates come in. They thought that the cupcake was more difficult than the tea. A lot of them hadn't made cupcakes before, but they thought, you know what, I can find a video on YouTube. That'll give me a recipe. That'll give me a process. I can do a fairly good cupcake from that. Person on 13 thought it was a pretty difficult task. There's not a lot known about the cupcake. They thought they would have a go at it by making some working assumptions. They were going to speak to another team in KCOM who had made cupcakes for Red Nose Day 6 months before and get some advice on that. The person that played the infinity card felt that really this user story couldn't be sized. There was no recipe defined, no steps to follow, and they weren't clear on who was supplying the cake holder. So again, the facilitator attempted to clarify. They said that the recipe and the process and method would be supplied by one YouTube link, and they'd settle on one particular way of doing it. In terms of the cupcake holder, they agreed that they were going to buy the cupcake holder in from a third party because it's not something we really want to get into making. And so the team played again. And you can see we got some convergence on 8. However, the person on 13 still really wasn't happy around the cake holder point. They felt it was a risk that the specification for the cake holders wasn't known. That could lead us to buying more or less ingredients, so we could have more than was actually needed. Our costs might go up unnecessarily, and there could be wastage. So again, the facilitator took this on board. They agreed that the cupcake holder would be bought from a cash and carry supplier who had a known specification for the cupcake holders on the website. And so, you won't be shocked to see the team all settled on an 8. So, what I'd like to do now, that was obviously a bit of a silly example, but hopefully illustrates some points. What I want to do is just talk about the conclusions that we can draw from that. So, we now know that a cup of tea is less effort to do than a cupcake. We can see the consensus was reached relatively quickly on both stories. I think it'd be fair to say that was far quicker than emails and spreadsheet reviews being sent round for each of the team members. The process was iterative and inclusive. Each round of discussion brought more and more insight to the team. We were taking decisions there and then. You'll remember the point about the cupcake holder, where we were getting it from. We also decided where the recipe was coming from on the cupcake. And so we were progressing quite quickly. The process was iterative and inclusive. More and more insight came out as we went. There was no outside influence brought to bear on the team. So they were doing this collectively. No one was influencing the numbers they came up with. Hopefully we made it fun, a bit better than, as I say, passing around Word documents and Excels. It hopefully created investment and responsibility with the team. People were giving their estimates. Hopefully they're bought into those estimates and will want to do their best to deliver to them. And the team have collectively understood the goal of each story and what we're trying to do here. So, what I thought I would do is give you some practical tips. I've been using this as a technique with the teams I've been managing. I thought I'd just pass that on and you could hopefully pick up some bits yourselves. So, all the team that will be doing the work should be playing the game and creating the estimation. It's better to start doing it face to face with a deck of cards. There is remote software available in the market, and you can use that later on when you get good, but I would suggest getting people familiar with the process face to face is a good thing. I'll place the team away from the room, away from the open office and place them in a room. I'll keep it to a reasonably small number, so a maximum of 7. If your project's big and you need more people, then create more teams. I'll set a house limit on the point scale. We found that 0 to 13 works well. Ditch the lower cards and the higher cards. The higher cards tend to give you not such good outcomes because you get less specific about things. Any stories that are too big or unclear, you post them back to the backlog. They need further work. I would time box the activity to keep focused. Don't try and estimate too many stories at once. And I would stay on top of your backlog. Play the game regularly to estimate new stories or re-estimate those that are in the backlog. So I've just put some useful links there. There's an overview from Mountain Goat on how to play planning poker. There's a link to Amazon where you can buy some poker cards if you'd like to get some for your team. And there is an online version of the game, as I mentioned, the links below. There is a free version, so if you wanted to try that out, you can do. So, as part of these Agile Bite webinars, the plan is to set a bit of homework for people to think about while you're getting ready for work in the morning. So this has been called the Homework Shower Challenge. I think it will be a regular feature of all the webinars. So my challenge is this. Would you be able to think about how you could start applying planning poker within the teams you're part of? And I'd specifically think about these questions. How's your team going to react if you introduced it? How would you introduce it to them? Who would be the best person to be the facilitator? And what scale would work best for you? We've been using Fibonacci planning cards, but as I say, you could just as well use t-shirts or the zoo animals. So, that's it from me. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen. I've just mentioned the survey again. It was in the email that went out earlier in the week. It's useful for setting the agenda for the webinar, and it will hopefully improve these sessions as we do them. If you've got any questions, please ask them on the chat. I'll stay online for sort of 5 minutes and hopefully do my best to answer. So thanks again. Cheers. Will the slide deck be available? Yes, we'll find a place to share them so that people can see them. The video is also recorded so that you can play back through it as well. So someone's asking why we're using this approach today. It's something that we've been doing within a team that I've been working on. So I just thought it useful to share with people to get some wider opinions from the group. I noticed some people have said they've had a few problems with the webinar jam software. It is the first time we've used this, so we'll take that on board. Also, where we're doing it, someone says it's a bit echoey. We're in meeting room 3 in Ipswich, so might need a bit more of a soundproof room. So someone's asked whether if you're scaling the points, the team converge on what point represents. So that's a good question. So you're not specifically looking to decide what a point represents in terms of time. You are just looking at how they relatively work against each other. So we know that a 2 is smaller than a 5, and we can say a piece of work pointed as a 5 will be less effort than a 2. You get into timings and things like that once you then start doing the work, so then you can work out how long the 1 point takes to deliver. So I hope that makes sense in answer to that question. Okay, so Frank's asked about actually understanding the tasks rather than the scale. So I think that boils down to how good your facilitator is. So I think if you look at playing poker, yes, you get a series of numbers out the back of it, and you can work out velocity and speed and things like that. But what you're also getting, and it's the point about insight in the team, so you are sitting down collectively and you are discussing each piece of work, and the team are reaching a consensus on that bit of work. They're figuring out where the questions are, where things are uncertain, and ultimately, if they can't estimate a piece of work, it gets sent back for further analysis so you can fill the holes, and it comes back ultimately as a better user story. So I think it's sort of 50% of the value is in the points themselves, but 50% of the value is in actually sitting down as a group and working through the work and getting a common understanding. Hopefully that answers the question. Right, Lewis asked whether you could keep a record of estimates so you could compare it with actuals. What you would see is your velocity chart. So quite often tools like Jira will tell you how many points you plan to deliver in a time frame versus how many you actually got through. So you can go back and look at that and see what you were delivering and how fast you're working. Because ultimately, we're looking here to make teams more efficient so that they can get faster and get up to an optimum velocity. So Tim asks, should the actuals from one sprint actively influence the points in the next sprint? Yes, within your team, because that's about your team understanding how fast they're working. So 2 points in my team is not necessarily the same as 2 points in someone else's team, but once you're, they are relatively, you can compare them relatively within your own team, and that, again, that's how you calculate your velocity and your speed. Okay, I think we're reaching the end of the questions. I'll just do a sort of last 1 minute warning, and then we'll close the webinar. So just to reiterate, this will be available as a video. Will be made available. Hi Simon, you asked why the first bites is on plain paper rather than high-level organisational benefits. There was actually one before this last week about high-performance teams. I think the video for that will be made available, so you can go back and have a look at that one as well. But I think with the communication with that, the agenda is going to be quite fluid. So if you want to feedback through the questionnaire, you can help to set the agenda yourself as to what you'd like to see in the content. Hope that answers your question. All right, last few seconds, and I'll close off if there's no more. Okay. Well, thanks for everyone's time. I'll close the webinar there. Thanks for listening.